Hello and welcome to a special Ineptus Astartes YouTube exclusive where we are going to take a look at the new Inductii rules from the Siege of Cthonia book. I felt very lucky to get my version of the book pretty early, and so I wanted to get out there and try to talk a little bit about what I'm seeing from this text. We are going to be organizing this review as a tier list where I try to take a look at the different unit rules and try to explain to you which ones I think you should look at right away, which are definitely worth modeling for or considering, and then which, you might not feel so bad if you can't find a list to put them into it. So before we get started, we'll explain a little bit about the Inductii. Basically, as the siege wears on and casualties mount on all sides, there is a pressure to keep up the number of squads. Some of the Space Marine legions had more stable gene seed than others. Some of them had rights, procedures, technologies, and things like that were central to their being that they used and employed. Some of them had a really hard time making Space Marines or finding viable candidates. So they all did sort of different things to try to put stuff together. What that means is that we're basically just getting 18 different variations on either a tactical squad or a despoiler squad for those legions. Some of them are quite good. Some of them are mediocre. Some of them are head scratchers, honestly, for me. But many of them are specifically tied to fluff in one way or another, which is really awesome and totally a win. So I went ahead and organized my tiering here into several different categories. So the first tier, the top tier, is the S tier, and these are must-have units. If you play one of these legions, you're probably going to consider making them. You might already have a squad that sort of looks the part already, but if you don't, you're going to want them because they will fit into one or more rights of war specifically really well. They're flavorful, all of the thing. The rules and the fluff, they work really well and they make sense. The A tier is going to be useful and fun. These are units that you would definitely consider in a couple different places and positions. They might have really excellent fluff. They might have rules that just really make sense for the way you want to play the Legion, but it will feel right and fit into the concepts that you're going to basically be looking for already with your Legions. The B tier is worth considering, and these are units that do make sense based on what's going on. All 5, spoiler, of the Legions that have units in this tier, I think it makes sense based on what we know of the lore and the concepts. Some of them are more interesting than others, but it all makes sense and it fits and it feels this way. The C tier, these are legions that have choices that make sense, I guess, from the perspective of lore, but maybe the rules don't exactly back it up, or it just doesn't quite feel right. The D tier is going to be for a couple of them that have rules that I see as kind of difficult to work with. Like building them, modeling them will look really nice, maybe. Putting them into your army will feel good, but then when you try to figure out how it's going to work with the rest of your force, it might not actually come out the way you want it to. Before we can start comparing and talking about the specific rules, though, we should really cover the basics of what the Inductii are and how it's going to function within the game. So basically the Inductii, it's a template that goes on top of a unit that already exists, and it has a number of different qualities and functions that it may or may not manipulate. So first of all, the Inductii unit subtype has some very specific rules. A unit that includes any models with the Inductii unit subtype cannot be joined by any other models or have any other models assigned to it. So, very specifically, there is no support for characters, apothecaries, anything with this unit. It has to stand on its own. Now, some of these specifically, you'll see that they'll have some rules that I think are really appropriate for some of these legions. So GW, feel free to pay me for this idea. I would expect to see an Inductii right of war at some point where your mandatory troops for the right of war are Inductii squads. There's a minimum of 3 you have to use, and certain units get the Inductii subtype or whatever. I'll take my my royalty check, send my information on how I should collect my money to Ineptus Astartes 30k@gmail.com. Thanks a lot, G-dubs. Anyway, no other model in a unit that includes any models of the Inductii unit subtype can exchange their power armor for artificer armor. So that's a upgrade that's going to exist within the squads that we're modifying, and it's not going to apply here, which totally makes sense. We're talking late war. We're talking desperation for the Inductii to even exist. They're not likely to have Artificer armor just laying around. And I think that totally makes sense, except for one exception, which I will explain later. The last thing is that a unit that includes any models of the Inductii unit subtype has the support squad special rule. That means that they can't be the compulsory choices, so you're going to still have to bring something else as a troop choice alongside them. You cannot only have Inductii. You cannot only have Inductii squads in your army, which makes sense. Like I said, they're relatively new, that sort of thing, unless you're playing something very late war, or when GW takes my idea and makes the Inductii Rite of War. You're welcome, by the way. So the Inductii template, there's several things that are going to be modified. First of all, each Inductii template may only be applied to units with a specific variation of the Legionis Astartes X special rule in a detachment with the same variation of the Legionis Astartes X faction. So I think one of those things is right away, I don't believe you can take these with anything like Coils of the Hydra. So Alpha Legion players, chill out for a second. Each Inductii template only gets to be applied to a specific list of units. And I think they're, without exception here, it's either despoiler squads or tactical squads. Some of the templates modify the composition of the unit, changing the numbers that you can have, the inclusion of sergeants, the ability to take additional models, all that sort of stuff. And some of them also modify characteristics one way or another. Sometimes there are additional unit subtypes, so you gain or lose certain subtypes, although I don't believe line is affected in any of them. So no matter what, you're talking about a scoring unit, which is good. War gear, of course, changes a lot, which becomes the crux and kind of the determining point for a lot of these different units on whether or not you're going to like them or not. And then, of course, special rules. Usually what you're going to see is that either Spite of the Legion, Heart of the Legion, or Fury of the Legion is going to be removed and replaced with another rule. And basically a lot of the discussion here is going to come down to, do we like the new rule better than the one that it has replaced? Now, this is going to be a tier list just because tiers and ranks are an effective way to sort of separate different things and to talk about and compare them. However, that does not mean that units that end up on the middle or lower tier of this list should not be used. It does not mean that the ones at the top, you should build lists around them. That's hardly the case. I don't know that there are any units in this list that we're going to talk about today that are so good that you could build lists around them. There are definitely some that are so fluffy that it makes me want to build lists around them, or like conceptually, I think that they would be really fun for, but it's definitely not something that you need to do. Now, tier lists have a certain amount of toxicity around them. So, Dan from the Accountability Buddies, if you've listened this far, turn it off. I know very well you hate tier lists, so save your sweet, sweet, gentle ears any more of it. But for the rest of us, we're just going to get started. So we're going to go ahead and start with the first Legion, and we're going to go through in that simple order for a couple of reasons. One is that Dark Angels players had to wait until like the middle, or maybe even almost the end of my last tier list video to hear what I had to say. And they're very special people, and they don't like to wait. So we're just going to let them get their news out of the way first. That way they can go off and watch some other video, and then we can talk bad about them behind their backs after they're gone. Good news for the Dark Angels players. You're going right to the top with the S tier. The Dark Angels Inductii template applies to Legion Tactical Squads. There's no characteristic profile modification or composition modification, but they do lose something. They lose the hexagrammation unit subtype, and so they cannot get any of those special rules like the Fire Wing, the Iron Wing, any of that. So that's not great. However, in exchange for that, all models in a unit modified by the Dark Angels Legion Inductii template must exchange their bolters for a Volkite Charger at no additional cost. They also specifically lose their Fury of the Legion special rule, which really isn't much of a loss because they have weapons that don't work with the Fury of the Legion anyway, because they're all using Volkite Chargers. So really, the thing that they're losing is the hexagrammation rule, which does hurt, but it is not as big of a loss considering, well, what we've got and what we're getting. To make this comparison easier, there is a way just to get a squad of 10 people with Volkite guns, and that's by taking a tactical support squad. A tactical support squad with 5 base, with plus 5 additional persons. Every Marine costs additional 12 points. The Volkite Charger is actually a free upgrade because it's considered a side grade to the Flamer that they would come with base. So 10 Marines, without upgrading anything on the Sergeant, whatever else, is 145 points. For 10 Marines with this Inductii squad, it is 100 points. That's a base savings of 45 points already. Just right there. Now, the Tactical Support Squad already has the Support Squad rule, so we're not feeling anything by that application here. However, we're picking up line because we're altering the Tactical Squad. So nothing is different as far as the Support Squad rule. We are losing access to our hexagrammation, but we're also 45 points cheaper, and we're scoring now. We still get Heart of the Legion as well, which means that we are still getting a 6+, Feel No Pain if we're standing within 6 inches of an objective, and we're Stubborn as well. You can't, of course, put an Apothecary with this unit, so we're never going to get a better application of that Feel No Pain, but it's still pretty darn good, and it's cheap. Now, you could bulk this squad up even more if you so wished. You're talking 4 more Marines, so a 14-man tactical squad with Volkite Chargers for the same rough points as 10 with the tactical support squad, and you're still scoring. That's just really good. Now, there are definitely situations where you might really want that hexagrammation mark because there's certain things you definitely won't be able to do. There are certain requirements and rights of war that you will not be able to take this in if you're going with the Dark Angels rights of war. However, most of those rights of war are really bad. And so you may or may not be taking those anyway. A lot of the Dark Angels players that I know have stopped looking at the specific rights of war and instead are trying to put in a whole bunch of different hexagrammation units into just the vanilla rights of war and having a lot of fun doing that as well. This is a really good unit for something that you might already have, but you can just call it something different. Maybe give them some sort of tag so that they look like and seem like Inductii. And in the next couple of months, all your buddies who are really jonesing for those militia rules are going to have just hundreds of little dudes who are going to really hate Deflagrate coming at them. So, I mean, it's definitely worth taking a look at. For me, it's definitely S tier. It's really good in a lot of situations. It's on brand as far as fitting the fluff and really fun. All right, next up we have the Emperor's Children, and they are similarly going to end up being an S tier unit. It just kind of turned out this way, guys. I'm not going to softball it the whole time. Just trust me on this one. So part of the reason for this is the fact that the Emperor's Children rules they're fluffy, they make sense, and they're immediately useful. So the Emperor's Children squad, it targets Legion Despoilers and not tactical squads. It doesn't modify characteristics or unit composition. It does, however, have a modification to war gear. Any model in a unit modified by this, any of these Despoilers, can exchange their chainsword for a charnable weapon for 5 points. Now, it's just a charnable weapon, so we'll take a look at those different options and talk about what we might want to do with it in a second. In addition, we'll touch on these special rules. All models in a unit modified by the Emperor's Children Legion Inductii template must replace Heart of the Legion with the Perfection Embodied special rule. And so this says that all models in a unit with a special rule are considered to have a leadership characteristic of 10 when resolving morale checks in the shooting phase or pinning tests, but not psychic checks. If a unit with this special rule is part of a combat that results in a draw, then a side that includes one or more models at the end of the fight subphase with this special rule is counted as having lost the combat by 1 point. If both sides include models with this special rule, then the combat remains a draw. So they have to win the combat, which makes sense. But the part that really, really is awesome is that leadership thing. So this unit, if you're going to try to get it across the table, one of the worst things that can happen is that you can get shot up and you can be pinned, you can be forced to retreat, because in a game where you're trying to march across the board on foot, if you end up getting routing and running away, even if you regroup right away, it's going to be very hard for you to get back into the fight because you've lost basically a turn. You have to repeat a turn of movement. The fact that you can test so much better on pinning, being able to move across the board, is really quite good. And also the opportunity for all units, all models in this unit to have better offense is just really, really awesome. So let's take a look at what that offensive upgrade is. So basically you have Charnel Sabers, Tabars, or Glaives. Sabers are Strength User, Melee, Breaching 5+, and Duelist Edge 1, which means that in a duel you're a +1 initiative. It won't matter for these guys because they're standard guys that can't take challenges, unless you're talking about your Sergeant, of course. But Melee, Breaching 5+ is really the key there. So on a 5+ to wound, we're taking a look at negating up to AP2 if we're wounding. So when you also take into consideration the Emperor's Children special rule, which on charges means you're striking at 1 higher initiative, then potentially striking at initiative, potentially hitting AP2 33% of the time when you wound is pretty nice. The Charnable Tabar is the same profile other than the fact that it is strength +2, but it's only breaching 6+, so considerably more likely to wound, but a lower chance to breach. And then also the Charnable Glaive, which actually is an even better, it's Duelist Edge 2, +1 to strength, and breaching 5+. So it's kind of a mix between the other two, but it is also two-handed. Now, all of those options I definitely think are worth 5 points, and I don't think I would take this squad without giving half, at least, the Charnable Sabers. They're going to run across the board. They're going to have a hard time still because they're only going to be weapon skill 4. You don't have the ability to put a support unit like an apothecary or a chaplain with them to help reroll hits. But the fact that they can move relatively confidently, they're going to have to get shot entirely off the board before they get to charge something to at least tie something up. And then once they hit there, they will have a chance to do a little bit of damage, even to things that you would think would be safe from their strikes. I totally like this. It totally feels fluffy, that idea of these, super driven duelists pushing so hard to guarantee their place in the lore of the Legion for being the best, the strongest, whatever. It's great. Here is our first, I'm not going to call it a disappointment, but here is our first, middle of the road. The Iron Warriors are going to come in with a B tier option. Their Inductii squad is worth considering, but I think mostly just worth considering. So if we take a look at their rule, it modifies tactical squads with no variation to the characteristic profile or the unit composition. There's also no modification to war gear. There is, however, a change in the rules. The Iron Warriors replace their Heart of the Legion special rule with the Souls of Iron special rule. The Souls of Iron special rule says that during the controlling player's shooting phase, a unit with this special rule must attempt a shooting attack if there is an enemy unit within range, and must target the closest enemy unit possible that is within its line of sight and is a valid target for shooting. If 2 or more targets are equally close, then the controlling player chooses which will be the target of the shooting attack. In addition, this unit automatically passes any pinning tests it is required to take. Okay, so this unit cannot be pinned. Pinning is pretty common. Depending on how common it is in your local meta, you might be more inclined to see and understand the power of this, because making sure that you're not pinned can be really, really... pinning is devastating in this edition, and it seems to happen more often than I think it will, constantly. So that in itself is pretty good. Losing Heart of the Legion does kind of hurt in that we're losing our chance to get that stubborn rule while standing on objectives. We are missing out on that 6+ Feel No Pain. And also we're missing Artificer Armor Sergeant to tank hits for us. But whatever. It's still something. Now, we have to consider what else our tactical squads might be doing in an Iron Warriors list to sort of really think about whether or not this is going to work for us. So immediately what I'm thinking of is the fact that when I'm running Iron Warriors, I at least am running Iron Warriors with Shrapnel Bolters, and I'm thinking Hammer of Olympia, which is the one which makes, it's the Rite of War that allows you to reroll 1s when you're shooting with these tactical squads. And so, I'm already going to be firing my Shrapnel Bolters all the time, and I'm going to want to do so. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to lose out on my Heart of the Legion. The biggest thing here is the fact that having no control over what I shoot with a weapon, the shrapnel bolters are shorter range. They max at 18, and the optimal kill range is 9. So my triple tap option is going to be at 9 inches of range. And so I'm going to really want to be close into a lot of different things. And if my opponent is smart, they can make me shoot pinning bolter shots at a dreadnought. And I will be forced to just let that happen. They can't be pinned, but they can still die. And the fact that I can't put an apothecary with them, the fact that I can't have the ability to have an artificer armor sergeant to sort of soak stuff for them if I'm looking to do that, it means that these will have some uses, but not necessarily a lot of uses. I could definitely see running one of these, maybe even a big blob of them in the center of the board, just to try to clear something out. It's definitely worth thinking about, but if you don't like the flavor of it and you're playing Iron Warriors, I don't think you're necessarily missing a lot. Is it fun? Is it worth considering? Yeah, absolutely. Is it necessary to redesign your lists around them? No, don't do that. Okay, the next one is one of my favorites, and that's partially at least probably because, I mean, White Scars are one of my favorite legions, full qualifier, but this really fits in nicely with a piece of lore in the setting, and also it's just really good rules. Now, what's funny to me is that there's little blurbs about lore for all of these Inductii templates, and the White Scars one says, recruited from the years of civil war, many Inductii of the White Scars were noticeably more pragmatic than their brethren, often receiving training from the Imperial Fists and Blood Angels. Alongside the recruitment masters of their own legion, these warriors were often utilized as scouts by the contingents they fought alongside before joining their legion proper. Okay, whatever. These are despoiler squads. Their characteristic unit type is not modified. A sergeant modified by a White Scars Legion Inductii template cannot have a power glaive. Theoretically, that's because of this concept where they're saying, well, they were actually squads. They were primarily trained not actually by White Scars. And their special rules says that the White Scars Legion Inductii template replaces Heart of the Legion with Proof of Valor. They are going to miss out on the 6+ Feel No Pain and Stubborn Near an Objective. But Proof of Valor, I think, is worth it. Maybe the first real example of a rule that's really, really worth it. The Emperor's Children one is quite good. And the ability to take the Churnable Sabers is excellent. But this one is really special and interesting. So, Proof of Valor says that when a model with this special rule suffers an unsaved wound during the fight subphase while locked in combat with at least one enemy unit whose majority weapon skill is 5 or more, it can make a special Proof of Valor roll to avoid suffering the wound. Roll a d6 each time an unsaved wound is suffered. On a result of a 5+, the unsaved wound is discounted, treated as having been saved. On any other result, the wound is taken as normal. This is a damage mitigation roll. Any model may take only a single damage mitigation roll of any type for any given wound. If one or more wounds is discounted due to this special rule, and the unit that benefited from that special rule has not been entirely removed as casualties or forced to fall back, then at the end of the fight subphase, that unit is said to have proved their valor. At the end of the battle, if any units from a player's army proved their valor, that player scores an additional 1 victory point. So I'm a little unsure of the wording on this rule, especially at the end, because it says that to prove your valor, you must save a wound with this mitigation, and the rest of the squad must not be wiped or fall back. But it doesn't, I'm not exactly sure. It just says, at the end of the battle, if any units from a player's army prove their valor, that player scores 1 additional victory point. My reading of that is that the most you can score is 1 additional victory point for this. Proof of Valor is essentially a secondary objective that you can score 1 time. That's what I believe, which it would be absolutely insane if it was more than that, because, if you could, throw 3 of these squads on the board and each of them do it, 2 rounds in a row, you're scoring 6 victory points just from that. That seems a little dumb, but the idea of getting 1 victory point, I think, is way cool. The 5+ Feel No Pain is also quite excellent, but let's look at this carefully because it's better than a Feel No Pain. It's damage mitigation. It's treated as having been saved. The wound is discounted. So Feel No Pain specifically has a stipulation that instant death overrides it. This does not say that at all. You can take a Power Fist. You can take theoretically, if you roll 5+s, you can get punched in the face by a Dreadnought, and you can live through it. Proof of Valor is essentially really, really strong. There are a couple things about this, on top of the fact that the Proof of Valor scoring is cool, on top of the fact that the 5+ Feel No Pain the 5+ damage mitigation, I need to stop saying Feel No Pain because it's not exactly, it's better. On top of those two things, this squad gets even better when you consider the two different ways that someone is going to want to play White Scars. So in Shigorian Brotherhood, these squads being infantry means that you can throw this squad into an outflank assault, and it can come in against your opponent's back line. The standard problem with running the Spoiler Marines is, like, what are they going to kill? And then what are they going to do once they get on the board? How are they going to get there? So putting them in an outflank strike sort of solves that first problem. You can throw them inside a Rhino and have them outflank out of that, or come across the board in that. If you have them in an outflank strike, then you can charge out of an outflank strike, no problem. The second problem is, what are they going to kill? Are you going to go up against something that only has a weapon skill 4, so they've got a decent chance to kill it? Yeah, that's what you're kind of hoping to do. But the problem, of course, is that you could run into something that's tougher, and then suddenly you're doing absolutely nothing. Well, this squad has a solution for that. If you can charge into a soft target, okay, like a backline support squad, if you want to muddle up a heavy support squad, make them intercept you, or make them, overwatch you or whatever, and so then you're limiting those resources, that reaction economy for your opponent. That's great in itself. But if you manage to charge into a Death Star of some kind, now you get a better than average damage mitigation and the ability to score points for staying there. Now, still, you've got to take and pass a leadership test, which may or may not be easy for you to do. But especially if you get a chance to do like a multi-charge mitigation of some kind, this is really doable. So I could see using 1 or 2 of these squads to charge in sort of like alongside a larger assault threat. And so you're just kind of dogpiling on to a target. You're just kind of adding a little bit of extra meat to the attack. And then if you manage to make one of those saves, then you're getting free victory points out of it. This squad has an incentive to go up against and tarp hit something tough, or to assist in a more difficult combat, which is awesome. Now, the other rite of war that you might want to use this for with the White Scars is the Magyar Mazan. And this makes them even better because the Magyar Mazan have a couple of rules, one of which is that in the turn that they charge in combat, the first turn of combat, the squad is fearless. Okay? So can you make a 5+ save against damage? Well, you're not going to lose combat because you're fearless. So you're guaranteed to make it to that part of the combat. So as long as your guys survive against a tough unit, then you can score a victory point. That's so awesome. You get a 5+ Feel No Pain no matter what because of the Magyar Mazan Rite of War, but these guys get a better one that allows you to take it against, Power Fists and the like. It's absolutely nuts. It's absolutely insane. And the other thing that I really, really like about this is actually a variation off of a rule from the Magyar Mazan Rite of War in last edition, which was a Shattered Legion Rite of War. But there was a special rule where, and it sort of exists now, but you used to be able to gain victory points for yourself if your opponent killed your squads. This is an even cooler one. There is a battle scene at the end of Path of Heaven in which a bunch of disgraced White Scars just go on an absolute stupid mission that has no chance of success just for honor and to try to stall Mortarion and the Death Guard. And this is that moment right here. These are rules for that concept. I don't care if we're calling them Inductii squads, that's fine, whatever. But that's what this is, and that is what I'm going to use this rule to represent, and I'm super excited about it. The rules are S tier. The fluff is S tier as well. This is my favorite in the book, 100%. So this next one, the Space Wolves are a lesson in why it's super important to read the rules more than once, because that is something that has changed my position on this particular Inductii template from going from a D tier to an A tier. Is this fairly arbitrary? Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, let's get into it. So the Space Wolves Inductii template applies to despoiler squads. It has a unit modification. You cannot have a sergeant with this. That is going to be huge, because that means that right off the top of the bat, the max leadership we have with this squad is 7 as opposed to 8. So they might run away more often than you're going to want them to. So something to consider. There are war gear substitutions as well, in that you can replace your bolt pistols for no additional cost, and any model in a unit modified by this can replace the chainsword or the chain axe for 1 point per model. That's something you're definitely going to do. 1 point for a +1 strength on a weapon that has shred, so you're re-rolling filled to wounds. It's kind of a dumb no-brainer. I really like this. It's really awesome. It makes sense. Basically what this is saying, that you can entirely have bolt pistols, you can entirely have combat shields, or you can entirely have chain swords, or you can entirely have chain axes. So for me, the chain axes are a go, and I'm going to talk to you in a minute why I think I would keep the bolt pistols. So the special rules are that the Space Wolves Legion Inductii replaces Heart of the Legion with Headstrong, the Headstrong special rule. So Headstrong says that when declaring a charge for a unit composed entirely of models with this special rule, the controlling player can declare it will be a Headstrong charge. For the record, the first time I read this, I just said that it is always a Headstrong charge, and you can see why that might be a problem in a second. If they do so, when rolling, determine the charge distance and add 2 to the result, and the charge is now disordered, which means that you don't get an extra attack for charging when you charge. However, you do get a +2 to your charge bonus, which is pretty nice. Now, let's talk about all the different things that are to take into consideration here. I did not like this unit at all beforehand, because the inability to gain the +1 to charge, if every charge is going to be a disordered charge, then you're really going to be stuck with just whatever weapons the unit has. Part of the reason also why I was really down before, but I'm slightly less down now on the combat shields, is that if it is a disordered charge and you have combat shields along with your chain axes, then you're a unit charging that only gets 1 attack apiece, which is not great. Weapon skill 4, 1 attack apiece, you're not going to kill very much at all. Now, the fact that you can choose to get a disordered charge for that extra +2, that's really, really different, and it changes a lot of different things for a couple different reasons. One is that we have to remember that the Legion trait for the Space Wolves allows them to run and charge. So these squads couldn't really book it and have a charge an additional 2 inches. This is really going to allow this squad to just haul across the field. Now, Leadership 7 means that they're going to be prone to breaking, which is going to be a little bit of an issue. And it will especially be a problem if they get into close combat and they're not able to kill things. So this might be a unit that you really try to put a lot of models in order to try to prolong or lessen your chance of having to take those leadership tests and maybe hopefully really overwhelm something once you get into combat with it. That being said, I don't like the combat shield survivability in exchange for the extra attack. I don't think this is a unit that you try particularly hard to keep alive, beyond padding its numbers to try to keep it from failing leadership tests. The extra attack from having 2 close combat weapons, I think, outweighs the other, especially when you're trying to and expecting to have to probably, maybe use or get a disordered charge off. If you charge, like I said, if this is like a 10 or 15-man squad and you have to make a disordered charge, then you get 15 attacks. And so you're not going to probably fare well in that initial combat unless you're literally just trying to tie something up. However, it's still definitely useful. And one big blob of despoilers with chain axes just running around the center of the field, or even just taking a flank by themselves just to cause havoc, I can definitely see that. It's totally reminiscent of past editions of rules for 40k of the Space Wolves, where you had, big mobs of blood claws just tearing through. So I really, really like this. Definitely, in my mind, puts it into an A. Something that would be useful in a lot of different situations, feels very fluffy, and chain axes are cool. Okay, next up we have the Imperial Fists. Their special rule is going to modify the tactical squad as well. Essentially, the only change is there's a war gear change and a rule change. For every 10 models in a unit, you may have one legionary exchange their bolter with either a heavy bolter for 10 points or an autocannon for 15 points per model. The special rule is one that exchanges with Heart of the Legion and the supporting fire special rule. Once per battle, a controlling player of a unit that includes any model with this special rule may declare a supporting fire before making a shooting attack with that unit. Until that shooting attack is resolved, weapons with the heavy type in that unit gain the pinning special rule in addition to any other effects their weapons might have. So basically, you give up the 6+ Feel No Pain near an objective and Stubborn for once per game having a chance to have a heavy bolter or an autocannon, or two, I guess, if you max out the squad, get a chance to pin something on a weapon that doesn't have a reliable AP that is going to even necessarily kill a model. And then it's not going to have any sort of leadership shenanigans to actually force the pin. This is fine because, it's boring. I think it's pretty boring. It's not going to be hard to modify or do because, you're just going to take presumably you just have like a guy in a similar mark of armor who's got a heavy weapon and just swap him out, and now it's an Inductii squad. It's the biggest thing, of course, when you're putting together any unit, you want to make sure that the unit's weapons are fairly organized for what it is that you want them to do. So, you're not going to mix and match a bunch of anti-infantry shooting with anti-tank shooting, because if half the squad does one thing and the other half does the other, then, whatever you're shooting at half the time, you're wasting half your potential. Now, an autocannon and a heavy bolter, they can still be shot at infantry, of course, and they are stronger than a bolter, so that is an upgrade, strictly speaking. The range is, very different. And so even well beyond the 24 inches, you can have the one heavy weapon in this squad chugging away, shooting at something as it tries to approach. And that's fine. I think, honestly, the ability to stand on or near an objective and gain Stubborn, I really think it's better than the chance to pin something. So I don't really care for the supporting fire special rule. If I took this, I guess it would just be for a chance to keep shooting at something else. But like I said, autocannon, heavy bolter, for 10 points and 15 points a squad, or model, you're not going to get a lot of extra kills out of it. Maybe a little bit, but, this one works just fine. It does sound appropriate for Imperial Fists, and of course you're going to be hitting on Ballistic Skill 2 because both of these are bolt or auto weapons, but it's fine. It doesn't really make me super excited, but it's definitely worth considering, and I'm sure Imperial Fist players will take advantage of it. The next up is one that there's a lot to talk about with the rules. The fluff is right on, and this is the Night Lord's Inductii template. This targets despoiler squads. It has a characteristic modifier. The sergeant in this despoiler squad has a leadership characteristic of 7. So similar to the Space Wolves one. The Space Wolves one are stuck at leadership 7 because there are no sergeants. The Night Lords are stuck at leadership 7 because their sergeant is a coward. So that's fine. That's fun, and it definitely fits. For war gear, all models in a unit modified by the Night Lord's Inductii template must replace their chain swords with Killer's Blades at no additional cost, which is a hilarious name, but whatever. And the Killer's Blades have a special profile, user strength, AP dash, melee, and then breaching 6+. So, all models in a unit modified by the Night Lord's Legion Inductii template replace the Heart of the Legion special rule with the Unscrupulous Murderers special rule. Man, they are pulling out all the stops with these names. The Killer's Blades and the Unscrupulous Murderers. Fine, just say it. Just say it, GW. We get it. Aaron Dembski Brown, I hope does he care about the game? Does he read things? Does he play it? If he reads this when he reads this, he'll be like, yeah, I wrote that lore. Anyway, so the Unscrupulous Murderer's special rule says that if the Legion Despoiler Sergeant of a unit with this special rule is involved in a challenge, at the start of initiative step 10, you can select up to 2 other models from the same unit and roll a d6 for each model selected. This is where it gets really funny. On a 2+, that model can resolve its attacks during this step. These attacks can only be allocated to the enemy model involved in the challenge. So you pick 2 models, and those models on a 2+, they both attack whoever is in your opponent in the challenge, which is the Unscrupulous Murderer's part, right? We're ganging up on this guy. However, does that sound too simple for you? Well, of course it's too simple. Let's keep reading. On a 1, though, those models that you selected to help you cheat in the challenge instead must resolve their attacks during this step, initiative 10, against their own unit. If they do so, these attacks can only be allocated to the Legion Despoiler Sergeant. So, pick 2 people to be your secret cheaters in the challenge. On a 2+, they help you defy the rules and try to kill somebody. On a 1, though, they kill you, which is awesome. It's really awesome. If either model involved in the challenge is destroyed by these attacks, the challenge is just no longer considered to be ongoing, and the remaining model can fight normally when their initiative step is reached. Okay, so there's a lot to consider in this step. First of all, I am definitely making this squad. Like, it's happening. This is too fluffy. This is too fluffy to not make. Night Lords players, you have a goal for the rest of 2023. You're going to make this squad. So I did a little bit of math here. Just want to point out a couple different things on the options that you might take, how this is going to work. So this is the Despoiler squad, and so for 1 in every 5 models, so 2, in a standard minimum squad of 10, can have special weapons, and so you're going to give them power weapons. So let's say you give them, for example, power axes, because you want to be able to kill things with AP2, okay? Well, the special rule for the challenge says those models strike at initiative step 10, okay? Does it say anything about unwieldy? Anything else? No. So your 2 power axe dudes who are cheating in the initiative, whatever, they're striking at initiative 10 with their unwieldy weapons. Screw that, okay? So AP2 strikes, let's see here. If they're charging, if you've charged and you're declaring the challenge, then you're looking at 3 attacks apiece from each one of these just regular dudes. These cheating dudes, whatever. In the challenge, the extra dudes are... if you go against something with weapon skill 5, let's say you're trying to kill an actual character, you're not actually likely to do that much. You are, because of the weapon skill differential, you're only likely to do 1 wound to a weapon skill 5 target, or 1.5 really. If there's an invulnerable save, you might do absolutely nothing. Against something that's weapon skill 4, it's really effective, though, and really scary, especially considering that most things that are weapon skill 4 are not going to have an invulnerable save that's worth talking about, so you're very likely to get through, and this rule, if it goes off, is very likely to kill the challenge before it starts against a weapon skill 4 target. It really is going to mess something up. I do think it's absolutely brilliant that you can kill your own sergeant, though, because it's like you think you are bringing your buddy to the fight, but he's actually like, nah, I'm taking over. There's some interesting things to think about with the murder blades. So by gaining breaching 6+, you are losing the shred on the chainsword, which actually doesn't end up being that bad of a trade. Breaching 6+ is really good, especially for free on that entire squad. So doing a little bit of math, first of all, I'm assuming a couple different things. I'm assuming you have a 15-man Inductii Night Lord squad. Why am I assuming 15? Well, 1, you're trying to trigger a talent for murder, and so you want to have a bigger squad because you want to outnumber your opponent. So You are going to have your sergeant. You are trying to do the cheeky challenge thing. So let's assume you're also taking 2 squads out of the combat. So you're taking 2 models out of the combat. So that leaves 12 basic Marines charging in. That gives us 36 attacks. 18 are going to hit. And then because of the +1 to wound, there are roughly 12 wounds, of which 2 will be breaches, and 3 are going to be failed rolls, roughly. And that's so with the kill blade, you're looking at roughly 5 dead Marines. Okay? Not bad. For 12 Marines attacking 36 attacks with chainswords, you're attacking 36 times, hitting 18 times. With the kill blades, you only averaged roughly 12 wounds, but because of those 2 breaches, you had a higher success rate to kill. But you're getting more wounds with the chainswords, so roughly 16 wounds, which is going to result in approximately 5 failed on a 3+ save. So the output there is relatively equal. The thing that's different, though, is that Murder Blades are considerably better against a 2+ save of any kind, just because of the chance to do the breach. That's really not the point, though. The point is that this squad has a chance to kill AP2, 2+ save models, and it's got an absolutely hilarious, giga fluffy sort of rule. I think having one of these squads is absolutely retired, and I'm rewriting my Night Lords list tonight to include this in my game because I absolutely need it. I 100% need it to happen and to work. Next up, we have the 9th, the Hawkboy's own, and they've got a weird one. They really do. This rule made me question whether or not I actually knew what I thought I did about the Blood Angels and their history, because I didn't realize that this was... Well, okay, someone will have to tell me, who's more of a Blood Angels lore expert. Are they referring to something that is new here with the Legion Inductii, or is this a reference to the old concept? So, the Legion Inductii template lore bubble says here that many Inductii of the Blood Angels saw none of the beauty in the battle that their Legion brothers spoke of, knowing only the horror of galactic civil war, shorn of the intensive hypno-indoctrination that encurbed the more animalistic aspects imbued by their gene seed. These warriors were often the dark mirror to their angelic brethren. Is there story to back up this concept? Because my understanding of the lore was that this was related more towards what the Legion was like before Sanguinius was found. The rule attached to them is the Revenant Legion, which I believe is a reference to their original name, isn't it? You'd have to let me know. Regardless, this is a tag that goes on to the Legion Despoiler Squad. It does not modify war gear. It just changes the special rule. This one replaces Spite of the Legion with the Revenant Legion. So, Spite of the Legion is the offensive boost for when you're charging a squad that has no characters or is pinned, you get an additional attack. And generally speaking, it's one that... So this special rule says that a unit that includes one or more models with this special rule may not make sweeping advances. In addition, if a unit that includes any models with this special rule wins a combat and all enemy units that it was locked in combat with fall back or are entirely removed as casualties, then all models in the unit gain the Fear 1 special rule until the end of battle. So if you know anything about the story and the fluff, the Revenant Legion, this is a reference to after they run away or after the unit is entirely destroyed. Part of the reason why the Revenant Legion can't sweeping advance is they're too busy having a snack, so to speak. That's something that's established in the lore, and like I said, I thought that was from something from before, but maybe there is more reference to that in the more common, or during the Siege of Airtime, whatever. Regardless, though, I don't think this is a particularly good rule, and it makes things sort of difficult. So losing the ability to sweeping advances don't come up like all that often, but they sure can, and when they do, it ends up being a pretty important offensive capability. If you beat an opponent, the chance to sweep them, if you're basically similar squads, you've got a relatively good chance just to remove the entire rest of your opponent's squad. It's never a good place to be when you're on the roll-off for initiative to try to run away from that thing. Regardless, though, the benefit that you get from it is even stranger. Fear 1, anything within 12 inches of this unit, potentially, later on in the game, is going to be at leadership -1. So what's really interesting is that, like, let's say theoretically this squad could be involved in more than one combat in a couple different turns, and Revenant Legion, that rule activates and they get Fear 1 in turn 2, and then they get into another combat on turn 3. They're even more likely to make the squad run away, and they're still not going to be able to pursue. So I mean, if you're pairing this squad with something else that can sort of benefit from the ability to make them run away, and then the other unit can sweep it, or just whatever, that's fine. But I just don't necessarily like this rule. Maybe I would bring this if I was playing with something that I meant to represent Amit, which I think has no rules as of yet, because I think that's more of his thing from, back when he was a Blood Angel before he met Sanguinius. But regardless, I'm just not sure that this one fits super great. The lore is cool, but I'm not sure it fits super great. Now, the last one we're going to do here, because I'm going to split this in half because this video is already getting pretty darn long, is going to be the Iron Hands. The Legion Inductii Iron Hands are one of my favorites. They definitely have an opportunity to do something cool, and more specifically, they've got a play style, I think, that was thought about when they put this into effect. So, Legion Tactical Squads are the squads that are modified by this Inductii template. All of these squads, the Inductii squads, gain heavy, as well as the Inductii unit subtypes, which is neat. They can't run, but they can reroll failed saves against blast templates, which is cool because large squads, or honestly even just 10-man squads, you're likely to get hit by templates from now and again, so being able to reroll those saves will be nice. The Sergeant can't take Artificer armor, but you know what they can do? Take one Phosphex bomb for 10 points, which is pretty awesome. In addition to that, all models in this unit replace Fury of the Legion with Forbidden Augmentations. Losing Fury of the Legion does hurt, without a doubt, but Forbidden Augmentations is pretty useful also. At the start of the controlling player's turn as the active player, but before the beginning of the movement phase, roll 1 dice for each unit that includes 1 or more models with this special rule. On the roll of a 5 or a 6, all models in that unit with this special rule gain +1 weapon skill and ballistic skill until the end of that player's turn. However, on the roll of a 1 or a 2, the unit suffers D3 wounds with an AP value of dash, which are then allocated by the unit's controlling players. So, at the start of the turn, you roll a dice. On a 5 or a 6, you have a +1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, which is great. On a 3 or a 4, nothing happens. And on a 1 or a 2, you take wounds. So, I mean, is this reliable? No, not at all. Are you also losing Fury of the Legion, which is one of the better offensive boosts that a tactical squad can provide? Yeah. However, you are also gaining a couple of different interesting things. You're gaining the heavy rule, and you're also getting that Phosphex bomb. Now, a Phosphex bomb is a range 6 inches, 5, strength 5, AP 2, it's assault 1, 1 use, blast 3 inch, poison 3+, crawling fire, and lingering death. So that's a lot of rules. But basically, it is a one-shot bomb. You can throw it 6 inches. It is a blast, so it is going to scatter. But it also has crawling fire, which means that you can move it up to 2 inches after it scatters. Poison 3+ means that even against something tougher than a strength 4, you're going to be wounding on 3s. Lingering death means that it leaves dangerous terrain behind after it's used. And AP2 means that a lot of things are taking damage from that. So this squad is going to lose Fury of the Legion, but it is going to gain this Phosphex bomb. And interestingly enough, there's a decent enough chance that throwing one Phosphex bomb does more damage and kills more models than you could get with the extra bolt gun shots from the Fury of the Legion, just because of the AP differential and how that works. What's really interesting, though, about this Inductii squad is all of the different things that you have to consider, and this is one of my favorites because of how it's designed, and also because of how it can be applied to the Legion that it is connected with. So, if you aren't going to be able to Fury of the Legion, you are going to want to be able to get up front and close so that you can double tap within that 12 inches so you can get a chance to actually use your bolters for something, right? When you get that close or closer, you're definitely going to want to be able to throw that grenade, and so that means squads in transports. The buff from the augmentations, +1 weapon skill and ballistic skill, is really cool, but you can't rely on it. It's only a 33% chance to go off in any given situation, so you shouldn't count on it happening. You just shouldn't. That being said, then, what this means is you need to put this squad into something so that it can jump out very danger close, do its thing, and try to accomplish something. Now, you're not losing Heart of the Legion with a special rule, so you are still getting a bonus, Feel No Pain. You are still getting Stubborn, close to objectives, so that's good. What's interesting then is that this means that, this would be a good squad to put inside, a Land Raider or a Rhino and try to scoot it up as quickly as possible, have it jump out, and then, toss its grenade on something. The Iron Hands have a Rite of War called the Head of the Gorgon, which allows them to, basically all vehicles get outflank. So I've been doing this already just because I like the idea of tacticals popping up on the back line and boltering things. I really like the idea of putting Inductii squads into Rhinos and having them do this now. Throw your one Phosphex grenade, hope that you're able to, get your +1 to hit and +1 weapon skill, and then just bolter things and become obnoxious. Stand on objectives, force your opponent to come after you. Now, what's interesting is that there's a discussion, I suppose, to be had about whether or not you want to put additional melee options onto a squad like this. If you could guarantee more regularly the weapon skill 5, I would say that this squad needs chainswords every time. But as it stands, you're not really sure you're going to be able to get use out of that, so I think I probably would just keep them cheap. It's going to cost about the same as a tactical squad you were using before, because, instead of buying Artificer armor, you're going to be buying a Phosphex bomb. So you probably have the points more or less already in the list. You just swap one of these out. But for Head of the Gorgon, I definitely dig this, and I will be running at least one of these squads for that exact purpose. Like I said, for me, it's the balance of the fluff, and it's the balance of, the use. It's definitely worth considering because I think these units can really fit into a few play styles that really speak Iron Hands to me, so it feels like they belong in a list, which is awesome. So definitely worth taking a look at. And besides, the Forge World Iron Hands squad in Mark III would be absolutely perfect for this squad because they look like they are mostly fully robotic, so they've done that heavy augmentation. I think it would be awesome. It'd be a cool modeling thing with basically great sculpts that already exist. So highly recommend. So like I said, I'm just going to stick with the first 9 legions here and expect the second half within a couple days, hopefully before the end of the long weekend. What did you think? Did you have any disagreements, any ideas? Is there anything you think I've missed? Are there other ideas for how to run these squads that are both fitting in the lore and also something that won't feel awkward on the tabletop? Let me know. What are you looking forward to most in the second half? Got a couple of big ones coming up that I'm very excited about. I'm excited to talk about the Alpha Legion, also the Sons of Horus. The Ultramarines have a rule which is, well, we'll talk about it. And also a couple of other good ones. A couple stinkers too, but, we'll see it all, how the whole thing comes together. Anyway, thanks for listening, and come back and see more soon. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Take care.